Didn't talk much on the drive. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was full of things neither of us could say. I watched the streetlights blur past through the window. Watched his hands on the steering wheel, steady, calm. He glanced at me once or twice. Nothing inappropriate. Just curious. When we pulled into the driveway, I expected him to drop me off and leave like always. But I fumbled with the door and nearly fell out of the car. He jumped out, rushed to my side, caught me gently. I remember looking up at him, dizzy, embarrassed, and saying, "I think I've had too much." He smiled, just barely, and said, "Let's get you inside." That was it. Simple. Kind. But his hand on the small of my back lingered just a little longer than it needed to. And I noticed. I don't think I meant for him to come in. But maybe part of me didn't want to be alone. Maybe I just wanted someone to see me for 5 minutes. Not as a wife, not as a mother, not as a checklist of responsibilities, just as a woman. A woman who was tired. And aching. And human. The house was quiet. My husband was still at work, or maybe asleep in the guest room again. That had become normal lately. I offered him a glass of water, trying to act like I had it together. But my hands were shaking. My voice was too loud. And when he sat on the edge of the couch, looking at me with that unreadable expression, I felt something shift. Not lust. Not danger. Just a moment. A quiet, still, intimate moment where nothing had happened yet, but the space between us felt different. I never thought I'd see him that night. Didn't expect it. Didn't plan it. But fate has a cruel sense of irony, doesn't it? Out of all the people I could have called, out of all the ways the night could have gone, he was the one who showed up. And something tells me that wasn't an accident. It was supposed to be just a normal office party. Nothing wild. Nothing worth remembering. But the truth is, I didn't eat much that day. I'd skipped lunch trying to meet a deadline, and by the time the drink started flowing, I was already on edge. 1 glass of wine turned into 2. Then 3. I laughed harder than I should have. I said things I probably shouldn't have. But in that moment, I didn't care. The music was loud. The lights too bright. Everyone else seemed to have somewhere to be, someone to go home to. I stood near the exit at the end of the night, phone in hand, trying to figure out how to get back without making a fool of myself. I called my husband. Twice. No answer. Sent him a quick text. "Hey, can you pick me up?" Not feeling great. Read. No reply. I remember standing there, cold wind cutting through my dress, my heels dangling from one finger. The world felt blurry, like it was tilted just slightly off balance. I tried a ride service, but the app kept freezing. Apparently there was some big event across town. Cars were booked out for hours. And then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. A message. From him. Just 4 words. "Hey, how are you?" It felt random at the time. Coincidental. But now, I'm not so sure. I blinked, stared at the screen for a second, thumb hovering over the reply button. And then I just typed, "Can you pick me up?" No explanation. No context. But 5 minutes later, he responded. "Send me your location. Be there soon." I don't know what I expected, but when his car pulled up to the curb and he stepped out, his face froze for just a second when he saw me. I must have looked a mess. Makeup smudged, hair sticking to my face, eyes a little too wide. "Hey," I slurred, trying to keep it light. "Surprise rescue mission, huh?" He didn't laugh. Just nodded and helped me into the passenger seat. His hand brushed against my arm, and I swear it felt like fire and ice all at once. Not because of him, necessarily, but because I couldn't remember the last time someone touched me with that kind of care. We started driving. City lights slid across the windshield. I tried to keep it together, but I'm a talker when I've had too much. Always have been. And that night, the words just spilled out. "I think I embarrassed myself," I said, laughing, though nothing was funny. He glanced over, didn't say much. Just listened. I kept going. Everyone else had someone to go home to, you know? People waiting. Excited to see them. Pause. I wiped at my cheek, pretending it was windburn, not tears. Your father doesn't even look at me anymore, I said suddenly, the words slipping out like they'd been waiting in the back of my throat for months. His hands tightened just slightly on the steering wheel. Still no comment. I mean, I try. I really try. I cook, I work, I stay in shape. I even bought new lingerie last month. I let out a dry laugh. He didn't even notice. The car was quiet, but not empty. It was like the air between us thickened. Like the space inside that car grew heavier with every mile. I turned my head to look at him. He wasn't staring. He wasn't reacting. But I could feel him listening. Not just hearing me, but listening. There's a difference. One that, honestly, I hadn't felt in years. I'm sorry, I mumbled. You probably don't want to hear this. He shook his head slightly. It's okay, he said. Soft. Calm. You're allowed to feel what you feel. And those words hit harder than I thought they would. I looked out the window, tried to hold back tears that didn't even make sense to me, because they weren't about the party, or the wine, or even my husband. They were about being seen. Really, truly seen by someone. We pulled into the driveway, headlights cutting through the dark. I reached for the door handle, but the car was still in park. He stepped out first. Came around to help me, just like before. I didn't resist. When he opened the door, I turned my body toward him, my dress riding up slightly, my knees trembling, not just from the cold but from something else, something unspoken. He reached out to steady me, and as I shifted my weight forward, our hands brushed. Just for a second. But it lingered. And that tiny, accidental touch felt louder than everything I'd said in the car. I looked up at him, eyes searching for something, maybe comfort, maybe clarity. And for a heartbeat, it felt like the world paused. Then I turned, walked toward the door. I didn't say anything, didn't invite him in, but I didn't tell him to leave either. I left the door open behind me, and when I heard his footsteps follow me inside, that's when I knew. This wasn't just a ride home. This night wasn't over. Something had shifted, and nothing was going to be the same after this. The moment I stepped inside the house, the warmth hit me like a wall, but it didn't make me feel any less cold inside. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the click of the door as he closed it gently behind us. And suddenly, I was very aware of everything. The echo of our footsteps, the weight of silence, the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and uneven in my chest. I didn't turn to face him right away. I walked straight to the kitchen counter, hands trembling, pretending to search for a glass. Maybe for water. Maybe just for something to do with my hands. The fog from the wine was starting to lift, and with it came a wave of God, embarrassment, cringe. Why did I say all that in the car? Why did I dump my entire emotional mess onto him like that? He didn't ask for it. He didn't deserve to carry any of that. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, part shame, part confusion. I poured myself water and took a sip, hoping it would drown the lump in my throat. But it didn't. And when I finally glanced over my shoulder, he was still there. Just standing near the door, watching me with that same unreadable look in his eyes. Not pity. Not judgment. Just something I couldn't quite place. You didn't have to come in, I said quietly, forcing a little laugh. I mean, thank you, but I'm good now. You can head home. He didn't move. He just looked at me for a long moment. Then said, "You sure?" And I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. He stepped a little closer. Not much, just enough that I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, clean, warm, comforting in a way that caught me off guard. And in that second, I hated myself for noticing. For liking it. I turned away again, staring at the sink like it held the answers. In my head, a storm had already started. Why did I call him and not someone else? Why did I open up to him that way? Was it just the wine, or was it something deeper? And then, worse, why did he come so quickly? Why was he looking at me like that? Like I was a puzzle he suddenly wanted to solve? Flashbacks started playing behind my eyes like old film reels. The early days of my marriage, when my husband used to call me just to hear my voice. When he'd come up behind me while I was brushing my teeth, wrap his arms around my waist, and kiss my shoulder without saying a word. I used to feel desired. I used to feel like I mattered. But now? Now I'm just here, filling a role, completing tasks, touching him only in passing, like bumping elbows with a stranger in a hallway. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, trying to push those memories away. And yet, in the corner of my mind, another image lingered. His son, my stepson, helping me into the car, the warmth of his hand on my arm, the way his eyes had locked on mine, steady, unblinking. He saw me. Not in some romanticized, movie script kind of way, but in a quiet, grounding way that made me feel real again. I opened my eyes and he was closer now. Still not too close. Still respectful. But close enough that I felt it. I didn't mean to make things weird, I whispered. He shook his head. You didn't. I laughed nervously. Pretty sure I spilled half my sad little marriage story in your passenger seat. That has to qualify as weird. He smiled, just a little. But his voice stayed gentle. I didn't mind. My chest tightened at that. Because in that moment, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I liked that he didn't mind. I liked that he listened. That he was here. That someone finally saw the part of me I'd been hiding for years. But that thought, that feeling, came with another one trailing close behind. Guilt. This was his father's house. I was his father's wife. And yet, I was standing here, noticing the way this man, this boy I'd known since he was barely out of high school, was looking at me like I wasn't invisible. Was I imagining it? Was it just the remnants of alcohol and loneliness warping everything? Or was there something unspoken humming between us? I told myself he was just being kind. That's all it was. But then why did his eyes linger on mine like he was trying to say something without moving his lips? Why did the space between us feel like it was vibrating tense, unsteady? I looked down at my hands, still gripping the water glass. My nails were chipped. My rings felt tighter than usual. I was suddenly so aware of every little flaw in myself, and yet, his gaze never flinched. What was I doing? What was this? There was no roadmap for a moment like that. No script. No boundaries. Just this aching, confusing blur of regret, comfort, warmth, and fear. I knew I needed to send him away. Knew that whatever was happening, real or imagined, needed to end right there. But I didn't move. Neither did he. The tension wasn't dramatic. It wasn't passionate or reckless or loud. It was quiet. Still. Like the deep breath before a storm. And in that breath, I felt more alive than I had in years. But also, terrified. Because I couldn't tell anymore if I was reading into something that wasn't there. Or if we had both crossed some invisible line already, just by feeling what we felt. And that ambiguity? That not knowing? It was worse than the guilt. Worse than the shame. Because it meant something might be coming. And I didn't know if I had the strength to stop it. I don't know why I said it. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was loneliness still swirling around in my chest like the last sip of wine at the bottom of a glass. Or maybe I just wanted to delay the moment he'd walk out the door and leave me alone again. Whatever the reason, I turned to him and said, "Let me at least make you a tea or something. It's the least I can do." He hesitated. Just a beat. Then nodded. "Sure," he said softly. So I made my way to the kitchen, still slightly lightheaded, now from nerves more than anything else, and filled the kettle. The silence stretched between us like a string pulled tight. I could feel his eyes on my back. Not heavy. Not invasive. But aware. As the kettle hummed to life, I glanced down and saw a faint bruise on my forearm, probably from bumping into something at the party. I hadn't even noticed it until now. Funny how pain shows up later, once adrenaline and alcohol have left the room. I walked back to the living room, tea in hand, and handed him the cup. He thanked me, barely above a whisper. Still so careful. Still so kind. I sat down on the opposite end of the couch, pulling my robe tighter around me. I'd kicked off the dress when I got home, wanting nothing more than to get out of it. Now I was in an old robe, faded cotton, frayed sleeves, but somehow I felt more exposed than I had in that red dress. He took a sip, then glanced at me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, then shook my head, then sighed. "I don't know," I said. He didn't push. Just let the words hang in the air until I was ready. I didn't mean to dump all of that on you earlier, I murmured, staring into my tea. He set his cup down gently on the coffee table. You didn't dump anything, he said. You just talked. You needed to talk. I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't a boy anymore. That was the first thing I noticed. Somewhere along the way, the boy I remembered, the quiet, lanky teenager, had become this steady, grounded man sitting calmly on my couch, speaking to me with a softness that felt like safety. I guess I haven't had anyone to talk to like that in a long time, I admitted. He leaned back slightly, resting one arm on the back of the couch. I get that, he said. It's weird, right? How you can live with someone and still feel like a stranger in your own house. That hit me. Harder than I thought it would. I nodded slowly. I feel like I'm always around people, but never really with them. Does that make sense? He met my eyes. Yeah, it does. Another pause. And then, gently, he reached out and touched my forearm. Right where the bruise was. Just 2 fingers. Light as air. You okay here? He asked, looking at the mark. I swallowed hard. Nodded. It's nothing. I must have hit something at the party. Didn't even realize it until now. His touch didn't linger, but the warmth stayed. It wasn't about the bruise. Not really. It was the way he touched me, like I was fragile and strong at the same time. Like he cared. Like he saw it and wanted to help carry it. The moment froze. Neither of us moved. It wasn't physical tension, not yet. It was emotional. Raw. Loaded. I felt this wave swell in my chest, an ache that had nowhere to go. And before I could stop myself, I whispered, I forgot what it feels like to be wanted. The words escaped before I had a chance to filter them. And the second they did, I wished I could grab them back, stuff them down, pretend they were never born. He looked stunned for a second. Not offended. Not flattered. Just quiet. His voice, when it came, was lower now. Richer. Slower. You shouldn't have to feel that way. And something in me broke open. Not in a dramatic, sobbing kind of way, but in that silent, internal kind of shattering, the one that leaves you breathless. Because no one had said that to me in years. Not my husband. Not a friend. Not even myself. I looked at him, and I could feel it, this unspoken thing between us, stretching thin like a thread about to snap. His eyes didn't wander. They stayed on mine. And in that gaze, I saw warmth. I saw confusion. I saw something that scared me. Desire? Maybe. But also, something deeper. Recognition. Like he'd been carrying something too. Something he hadn't dared say out loud. The world got so quiet. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall and the faint creak of the couch as we shifted slightly toward each other. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't plan anything. I just sat there, wrapped in a robe, heart thudding, breath shallow, trying to convince myself that nothing was happening, that nothing could happen. But I also didn't stop it. And then, everything stopped. My heart, my thoughts, the ticking clock, the tension, the guilt, the air, because what he did next changed everything. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of us. Maybe it was no one at all. Maybe the space between us just collapsed. There was no grand moment. No sweeping music, no dramatic kiss like in the movies. Just stillness. And then, a shift. Our faces were close. Closer than they had any right to be. My breath caught in my throat as I felt the warmth of him, his presence, his focus, like the world had narrowed down to just that sliver of space between our lips. And then it happened. A kiss. Not deliberate. Not even confident. More like a question neither of us had the strength to ask out loud. It was soft. Tentative. The kind of kiss that felt like it shouldn't be happening, but also like it had been waiting in the shadows for far too long. His hand brushed my cheek, barely touching. My eyes closed before I could think better of it. And for the briefest, most fragile moment, I let go. I let myself feel it. Not the thrill. Not the danger. But the relief. The aching, devastating relief of being touched, not out of obligation or routine, but out of want. Of being held like I mattered. Like someone had chosen me in that moment. And that's what broke me. Because I knew, God, I knew, this wasn't right. It wasn't okay. It crossed every line I had spent years holding up with trembling hands. But I didn't stop. Not right away. There was a moment, just one, where I let my guard down completely. Where I leaned into him. Where the guilt hadn't caught up yet. Where the past didn't matter and the future hadn't arrived. Just that moment. That impossible, weightless moment. But it didn't last. Because as soon as it ended, as soon as we pulled back and looked at each other, everything came crashing down. I saw it in his eyes first. Shock, confusion, and something that looked an awful lot like fear. And I felt it in my gut, this violent wave of panic rising up like bile. What had I done? I stood up too quickly, the robe shifting on my shoulders, suddenly too aware of everything. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. He stood too, reaching out like he didn't want to let the moment end. But I stepped back. No, I whispered. My voice was barely there. He froze. This never happened, I said, quieter this time. My hands were trembling, heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo off the walls. He nodded. Slowly, but the look in his eyes told a different story. They were wide, stunned, searching. Like he wanted to say something. Apologize. Ask why. Or maybe, ask if it had meant what he thought it did. But he didn't say anything. And I couldn't stay in that room a second longer. I turned and walked away, every step feeling heavier than the last. My legs were shaking, but I kept moving. Up the stairs. Past the photos on the wall. Past the hallway I'd walked 1,000 times before, but that night it felt foreign. Off. When I reached my bedroom, I shut the door, turned the lock, collapsed against it like I'd just run a marathon. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, eyes wide, heart broken open in a way I hadn't expected. Because I didn't know how I got there. I didn't know who I had just become. And I didn't know how I'd ever face myself again. The damage was done. And the silence that followed was louder than anything. The next morning, he was gone. Just like that. No note. No text. No awkward goodbye from the living room. Nothing. Just silence. At first, I convinced myself I was relieved. That it was for the best. That maybe, just maybe, he had woken up before the sun, felt the same knot of guilt twisting in his stomach, and decided to pretend it never happened. I told myself it was a moment, an isolated, drunken, emotional lapse. Something we could both sweep under the rug and move on from. But the truth? I felt it the second I opened my eyes. That cold, hollow ache in my chest. Like something had been torn open and left raw. I sat up in bed, my robe still clutched tight around me, and stared at the wall like it could give me answers. My body was still. But my mind? It was chaos. Flashes of the night before came rushing back. The way he looked at me. The way I looked back. The kiss. The pause after. The way we just let it happen. And then, the way I'd run. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on my face, hoping it would wash away the shame. It didn't. It clung to me. And when I came downstairs an hour later, hair brushed, robe swapped for jeans, and a sweater like nothing had happened, my husband was already at the kitchen table, reading the paper, sipping his usual black coffee. Not a care in the world. Morning, he mumbled. Morning, I replied, somehow steady. He didn't notice anything. Not the tension in my voice. Not the way my hands trembled as I reached for the kettle. Not the way I avoided his eyes. He didn't ask about the party. Didn't ask how I got home. Just assumed I'd figured it out. Just assumed I was fine. And I think that hurt more than anything. He didn't know what had happened. Of course he didn't. But still, wouldn't you expect some concern? Some curiosity? Anything? Instead, we moved through the morning like it was any other Saturday. The usual routine. Two strangers in a house built to look like a life. But inside, I was screaming. Every sound felt sharp. The clink of his spoon in the coffee cup. The shuffle of newspaper pages. The ticking clock. It all echoed like a drum inside my chest. I kept flashing back. To that moment on the couch. To the way our lips met. To the silence that followed. To the look in his eyes when I whispered, "This never happened." Did he believe me? Did he agree? Or was he out there somewhere, reliving it the same way I was? That day, I checked my phone 3 times every hour. Nothing. I didn't text him. Didn't call. But I kept hoping he would. Even just one message. A single word. Something. But silence. The days that followed were more of the same. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner. I did laundry. And I waited. I told myself I was being paranoid. That he was just giving space. That maybe he felt guilty too. But then I remembered the look in his eyes. That wasn't just guilt. That was confusion. That was need. That was something he wasn't ready to talk about, and neither was I. A few days later, my husband mentioned a family dinner we'd planned weeks earlier. Just the 3 of us. Casual. Quiet. Nothing fancy. I reminded him, he said, spooning pasta onto his plate. Said he'd think about it. I froze mid-bite. He said he'd think about it? That wasn't like him. He was always polite. Always showed up, even when he didn't feel like it. But this time, he didn't respond. Dinner came and went. An extra plate sat untouched at the table. My husband barely noticed. Just mumbled something about work or traffic. But me? I sat there with my stomach in knots. Barely touched my food. Because that empty chair wasn't just a seat. It was a reminder. A gaping space filled with silence and weight and all the things we hadn't said to each other. I went upstairs early that night. Curled up in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. I thought I could bury it. That one kiss. That one moment. I thought time would smooth it over. Make it blur. Make it vanish. But then, I saw him again. And everything I'd been holding in, every thought I'd stuffed down, every feeling I'd tried to silence, every part of me that had been screaming in the dark, it all came rushing back. I think the hardest part wasn't the kiss, wasn't the moment itself. It was everything that came after. The silence, the thinking, the wondering. Because once the dust settled, once the adrenaline faded, once the house was quiet again, I was left alone with myself. And that's when the real questions began. Was it loneliness? Was it betrayal? Was it me reaching for someone, just to feel alive again? Or was it something darker than that? I kept asking